Hello everybody and welcome to the 74th annual meeting of the American Academy for Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine. It has been an honor and a tremendous privilege to serve the Academy for the last 12 months. I can say they've been the most incredible 12 months in my life. It almost felt like riding a roller coaster, sometimes scary and accelerating, but overall a fun ride. To tell you the truth, I never imagined what I was signing up for when I accepted to be president several years ago. But it has been fun. Two unique events marked the beginning and the end of my presidency. A year ago, we were in Anaheim, California, celebrating the first combined meeting of our Academy with the International Alliance of Academies of Childhood Disability, having more than 1,400 participants and enjoying each other in the beautiful part of the country. Remember that welcoming reception in the plaza? Having margaritas and listening to mariachi music? Enjoying the wonderful California coast weather? And now here we are, celebrating our first virtual annual meeting and trying all to adapt to this new mode, wishing to see each other, hear each other, and feel the human spirit and energy that can only be experienced at in-person gatherings. I know, it's hard to feel all that through our computer screen. But you know, on the positive side of this digital experience, we're now able to reach out more people than ever before. The theme of last year's conference was Knowledge Without Borders, and I believe now that has been accomplished. So I hope you enjoy the meeting from wherever you are. What happened in between these two unique events? Our first combined meeting with the IAACD, and now our first virtual meeting. Well, you guys are right. A lot of change, a lot of challenges, and tremendous amount of hard work and resilience. I'm sure you understand this, since I know all of you have gone through similar experiences at work, in your community, and with your family and friends. But challenging times do not come without hope and help. In January of this year, we had the tremendous fortune to welcome our new executive director, Tamara Waxter, who started her new role running. Yes, running fast and furious. She's been amazing, and I am very grateful to her and all of our wonderful office staff in Milwaukee who are responsible for keeping this organization rolling despite COVID and everything else. There are not enough words to express our gratitude for the incredible amount of work you all do quietly behind the scenes. As you can imagine, we've been extremely busy. We've had more board Zoom meetings, phone conferences, email exchanges, and all other kinds of communications than ever before. My sincere appreciation to all of you who have been always willing to serve and be there, many times with a very short notice, after hours, and even weekends. I'm very proud and grateful to all of you who generously give your precious time and talent participating in the different committees, SIGs, and other groups. And that includes some of you who I have asked to represent our Academy at the IAACD in different capacities. Your work makes this organization better every year. Thank you for your service. There is a very special group of people that deserve our heartfelt recognition and appreciation. They are the members of our board of directors. I admire their selfless and dedicated hard work on behalf of our Academy. Let me tell you, it's not hard to be president when you are surrounded by a group of amazing people like they are. And like they say, it's all about the team. I also want to take this opportunity to recognize and thank the Community Council members and its leadership. Thank you for your generous contribution to the Academy. Your perspective as patients, parents, and advocates for those with childhood disabilities is very important to all of us. You really enhance our organization by reminding us all why we do what we do. And finally, a team that deserves the highest recognition and admiration is the Program Organizing Committee, who in a very short period of time had to plan for 3 different meeting formats. And you know what? They never lost their cool. I never heard any complaints or screams. And here we are. Thanks to their countless hours of dedicated work, we can now enjoy our first virtual annual meeting. So thank you, Susan, Jolene, and Jeremy, and all of you who made this meeting possible. Well, colleagues and friends, it's been a true honor and privilege to serve the Academy as its president. thank you for giving me this opportunity. I learned a lot about why we are one of the best organizations in the world. And that is because of all of you. Because of the passion and love we all have for what we do, for who we serve. So like they say in Texas, thanks y'all. And now let me introduce to you our next president, Dr. Susan Cienko. But before I do that, I would like to share some facts about her life. I think I first met Susan during my first time on the board many years ago. She was a webmaster, and I was so impressed because she seemed to know so much about website design that I thought she was a systems engineer. Later, I learned she was a kinesiologist from Shriners in Portland. So let me tell you a little bit about Susan Cienko. Susan was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, and as the picture shows, she had a very happy childhood. She was the oldest of 4 siblings. All of their names started with an S: Susan, Sharon, Stephanie, and Stephen. When she got older, she moved to Waterloo, University of Waterloo, which is just a few miles west of Toronto, and there she got a major in kinesiologist. In 1985, she moved southwest to Springfield, Illinois, where she got her first job. She became the director of the Motion Analysis Lab at the Southern Illinois School of Medicine. At the same time, she continued her education and obtained a master's degree in Health Services Administration from the University of Illinois in Springfield. From there, she moved to Chicago to work at the Children's Memorial Hospital and became instructor of clinical surgery in the Department of Orthopedics at Northwestern University Medical School. And that is where she met Dr. Luke Diaz. Dr. Diaz was one of our Academy past presidents, and by the way, he was responsible for reaching out to Latin America, broadcasting part of our annual meeting online for the first time. In 1992, she really moved west and went to Portland, Oregon, where she has been since then. There she has been working as a kinesiologist and senior clinical research associate at the Shrine. She has written many scientific papers and several book chapters and is a recognized teacher in that institution. Susan's constant desire to excel led her to engage in a PhD program at Portland State University, and in 2014 obtained her doctorate degree in systems science. I knew she was smart. At the personal level, Susan has a beautiful family and is a happy and proud mother of twin girls who are now full-grown adults. Susan's commitment to the Academy is indisputable. For the last 30 years, she has generously given her time and talent in different committees and as a board member. And with all that, she still finds time to enjoy outdoor activities like biking and sharing a wonderful time with her family. Edmund Hillary, who was the first recognized human to climb the Everest, said, "People do not decide to become extraordinary. They decide to do extraordinary things." And that is what you have done, Susan. In the face of one of the most challenging times in our recent history, you decided to move forward and organize the first virtual annual meeting. And let me tell you, you never showed signs of being afraid, despaired, and always kept a smile on your face, encouraging everybody to keep going without ever losing hope. Susan, thank you so much for deciding to do an extraordinary thing and for generously giving yourself for the benefit of our Academy. We love you and we welcome you as our next president. And now, Susan, as it is a tradition in our Academy, I need to pass the president's gavel to you. And because it's 2020, we'll have to do the passing of the gavel virtually. So here we go.
Thank you, Mauricio. On behalf of the Academy, we'd like to thank you for your compassionate leadership over the past year. I only wish we were together in New Orleans rather than me being at my dining room table in Portland, so that we could have exchanged the gavel in person rather than virtually, sharing the educational offerings, and enjoy the social activities together. It has truly been my pleasure to work with you this past year, and I look forward to continuing this work on behalf of the Academy. It is my honor to represent the AACPDM as the 2021 president. The Academy has played a significant role in my professional development since I attended my first meeting way back in 1986. Many of you in the audience have been my mentors, my colleagues, my collaborators in research, but mostly I think of you as my friends. Each year I look forward to this meeting as a time to reconnect. The friendships that I've made because of my involvement in this Academy have truly expanded both my professional and personal family around the globe. Although I will miss seeing each and every one of you in person, I do know that we've all become extremely adept at hosting virtual social hours. So I hope that you take time during this meeting to connect, not just academically, but socially, as this is an important aspect of our Academy meeting. Over the years, many people have significantly impacted my life. In the early years, my mentors were in the area of gait analysis, with each of them encouraging my dreams and passion to use biomechanics to enhance the understanding of gait pathology in children with disabilities. They also taught me many life lessons, like the importance of sharing your knowledge openly with others, challenging yourself to ask the very difficult questions, remembering to think outside the box because the answer might not be right in front of you, and the importance of working with a great team. To each of them, I am extremely grateful for their wisdom. The one thing I truly believe is that much of your success and happiness in your work is based on whom you work with. I've had the distinct pleasure of working with Dr. Michael Iona, Dr. Michael Sussman, and Kathleen Buckon for the last 28 years. We've made a great team examining the efficacy of treatments for children with cerebral palsy and other childhood onset disabilities. Their constant support and encouragement have truly been appreciated, especially during this challenging year. I also have the pleasure of working with my amazing colleagues in the clinical research department. They definitely make coming to work each and every day a distinct pleasure. I would also like to acknowledge my colleagues within the Shriners Hospitals for Healthcare system. It is truly wonderful to be part of a supportive system that is dedicated to improving the lives of children by providing pediatric specialty care, conducting innovative research, and offering outstanding educational programs for medical professionals. The Shriners Hospitals team has supported my growth over the past 28 years, for which I am truly grateful. Although my professional friends and colleagues have played a significant role in my life, it is truly my family that has been there since the beginning. I've always had the unwavering support of my parents, Richard and Donna, my siblings, Stephanie and Stephen, and of course, my family, my husband, Jim, and my daughters, Morgan and Sydney. They have always encouraged me to set my goals high and supported my every adventure. Yesterday, I received flowers from my family, and the card said that they are all extremely sad that we won't be together in New Orleans, sharing this experience, enjoying the city together. The work of the Academy is truly a team effort. Everyone, whether a board or a committee member, volunteers their time to move the Academy forward with the goal of enhancing the lives of children with cerebral palsy and other childhood onset disorders. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the board. I know that this has been a really challenging year and want to thank them for their support, as we have navigated these uncharted waters. Each year, the board examines the initiatives within the strategic plan to determine our progress and ensure that the work of the Academy continues to move these initiatives forward. As we will develop a new strategic plan next year, we really need to consider how the events of this year have impacted the Academy. We want to ensure that we balance our strategic initiatives with fiscal responsibility. Over the year, the board has been piloting the inclusion of special interest groups into the Academy structure. Currently, we have 2 SIGs, the complex care and the adults and aging. We are in the first year of a 2-year pilot phase, and we are extremely pleased at how these SIGs are working. We want to thank the complex care SIG chair, Rishi Agrawal, and the adults and aging SIG chair, Caitlin Cassidy, and their team for all the hard work they have done putting together the SIG meetings that will occur during this program. Since the meeting is virtual this year, SIG meetings are open to everyone, whether they're attending the meeting or not. We want you to invite your colleagues to join these meetings and engage with other professionals passionate about understanding the issues related to complex care and aging with disabilities. The events of this year have highlighted areas that are important to the health and well-being of children with disabilities and their families and our members. Most of us were unprepared as how COVID-19 would transform our everyday landscape. The pandemic has highlighted the need to ensure that both the mental and physical health of disabled children and their families are addressed. COVID-19 continues to cause major disruptions in service provision, participation, and the overall well-being of children with disabilities and their families worldwide. As a multidisciplinary academy of professionals, we need to ensure that these children are cared for and have equal opportunity for protection from disease. Already, our International Alliance of Academies of Childhood Disability has taken the lead and established a COVID-19 task force to discover the impact of COVID-19 on access to healthcare and the responses to the pandemic. The task force has created 3 working groups. The first, to engage with individuals around the globe regarding the impact of COVID in their countries. The second, to review COVID-related surveys and to map these themes against the UN Children's Rights Charter and the ICF. And the third, to review COVID-inspired resources that will be available to families and professionals. These findings will inform us about the global impact of the pandemic and allow us to examine not just the common themes, but the differences of the impact of COVID-19 across the globe. In 2019, the board recognized that ensuring diversity and inclusion were important to guiding our academy. In responses to concerns, the board created a diverse ad hoc committee to help develop a diversity statement and examine additional avenues to embrace diversity within our academy. They recently completed the diversity statement, which reads, "At the AACPDM, we believe that diversity and inclusion are important to the success of our mission. We all benefit from the rich talents and different perspectives fostered by the diversity of our members. The AACPDM sincerely respects, values, and promotes diversity and inclusion among all individuals, groups, and organizations from whom we interact, collaborate, and partner. We also challenge individuals to be personally active in utilizing strategies that promote diversity and inclusion. The AACPDM is committed to being a staunch advocate for professionals of all disciplines who wish to build an inclusive and diverse culture that honors and celebrates all." Following the death of George Floyd, we wanted to assure our members and our patients and families that we as an academy oppose systemic racism. The ad hoc committee was again of great help in developing a separate statement that was released on June the 10th. At the Academy, we oppose disparities in medical care and systemic racism against Black people and other people of color. We will use our platform to elevate and amplify all voices around health disparities, including the voices of our individual members. We will be staunch allies with children and adults of color against systemic racism. We will do this not only because it's the right thing to do, but because medical research shows that it directly affects the health and wellness of people of color in our society, including those with and at risk for cerebral palsy and other childhood disabilities. We are committed to taking an active and conscious role in this process. We will use these principles to continue to fulfill our mission to promote excellence in research and services for the benefit of people with and at risk for cerebral palsy and other childhood onset disabilities. We as an Academy feel that these statements are distinctly necessary because threats to equity and equality are also threats to the health of our Academy members and children with disabilities and their family. We are working on measures to ensure that the actions of the Academy are reflective of these statements, and we will need your continued support and input as we move forward. "2020 has been an unusual year. As you look at the events that have impacted us around the globe, you realize the magnitude of the challenges that each and every one of us has encountered over the past year. Our thoughts and prayers go out to those who have suffered loss and have been personally impacted by the many events that have happened over this past year. We would also like to thank the frontline and essential workers. There are no words that can adequately express our gratitude for all they have done during this difficult time. Over the years, the AACPDM and its members have demonstrated resilience from the earthquakes in San Francisco to the events of 9/11. This is even further evident by where we are today. It is the resilience you will see as you attend this year's meeting, the work that has gone to each and every presentation to provide you with updated information on clinical care and research for children with cerebral palsy and other childhood onset disabilities is amazing. Through the events of this year, we have learned new ways to connect, and we are learning that just because it's virtual doesn't mean it's not real. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the 74th annual meeting of the AACPDM and the first ever virtual meeting. Yesterday, we started with our pre-courses. While there were a few technical glitches at the beginning, we were able to adapt quickly and continue to provide attendees with great information that they can use to take back in their clinical practices. We want to thank all the presenters for the hard work they have done and the attendees who are working with us as we navigate our new virtual platform. It has definitely been a learning curve for each and every one of us. Each of you should have received an email with tips to making the virtual experience with the platform successful. While the order of our traditional meeting has been altered slightly, many of you may now have already attended lunch and learns, which we normally call breakfast, instructional courses, and free paper sessions. We really hope that you have enjoyed what you've experienced so far in the meeting. The meeting was originally slated to be in New Orleans. I know we were all looking forward to listening to jazz in the French Quarter, walking down Bourbon Street, eating beignets, and drinking Sazeracs. While we all wish we could be there in person to see each other and experience the offerings of the city, I'm glad we are having this opportunity to engage in the rich educational content in much the same manner as our traditional in-person meeting. Our theme, Unmasking unmasking potential is a challenge to each and every one of you. We wanted you to use this meeting to unmask the potential of your patients and families, unmask the new paradigms in treatments, rehabilitation, and surgery, unmask new opportunities for collaborations, unmask new research and educational strategies, and finally, we mostly wanted you to unmask your own personal potential. This year's program and format would not be possible without the 2020 scientific program co-chairs, Dr. Jolene Brandenburg and Dr. Jeremy Bauer. In just one short year, they've planned our traditional in-person meeting, our hybrid meeting, and finally our virtual meeting. They've put in countless hours designing, modifying, and coming up with innovative ideas to bring this meeting to you virtually. Their willingness to be flexible and adapt to the daily challenges provided a positive experience during these uncertain times. I cannot express my thanks enough to them both for all the work they have done and be by my side during this entire journey. It has truly been a pleasure. While many of you may not know the Academy staff, they are at the heart and soul behind the scenes. I cannot express my gratitude for everything they have done this year to make this meeting happen. Their dedication to the Academy is unending. And with all the daily changes, they've truly stepped up and embraced the challenge. We cannot thank them enough for their support of the work of the Academy. Despite the uncertainty of this year, I can truly say that I am blessed with a wonderful team to work with. It has been definitely my pleasure. We want to thank our sponsors for their continuing support. They support not only the program, but the important scholarships that allow people to attend this meeting. When we left Chicago the first weekend in March, we had determined the presentations and format of the scientific program. Our team worked hard to keep the program as similar to that as our traditional meeting by keeping the same number of papers, lunch and learns or breakfasts, and instructional courses. We are excited to offer such a rich program to you virtually. While we can't be together in person, we also tried to provide you the opportunity to interact with the presenters as much as possible through the live virtual chat space. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentations, which will be answered at the end of each presentation, including the general session. We're excited this year to have our poster session hosted by our past presidents. We invite you to find your area of interest and join a past president and learn more about the exciting research in the area of developmental disabilities. This year, we will have a virtual exhibit hall. We encourage you to visit with our vendors where you can schedule meetings with representatives to provide you more information about their products. We thank them for their continued support during these times. Our Adaptive Sports Committee has developed our Get Up and Move activities for each of the breaks. They definitely want to make sure that we stay active throughout the meeting. Rather than our traditional in-person community forum, Jen Lyman, who is our local New Orleans host and the chair of the Community Council, in conjunction with other members of the Community Council, have created 4 presentations on important topics for individuals with cerebral palsy and their families. This information is both available on the meeting app and the AACPDM website, providing access to all. Finally, we have worked with our platform company to record the sessions, allowing you to watch at your leisure between October 5th and December 31st. Since you are able to watch as much content as you want, either live or on demand, you are able to earn more CME credits than ever before. Words cannot express my thanks to all of the presenters at this meeting. They've done an amazing job adapting their content for virtual presentation, learning new platforms, and getting up at all hours of the night to attend the live question and answer portions of this meeting. We also want to thank you, the attendees, for joining us as we navigate our first virtual meeting. We want to welcome you again to the 74th annual meeting of the AACPDM, and thank you for accepting the challenge to unmask your potential. Thank you.
I have the honor to introduce our presidential keynote speaker. She's a very good friend of mine, Dr. Ann Henderson Tilton, who is Professor of Neurology and Pediatrics and Section Chief of Child Neurology at the Louisiana State University Health Science Center in New Orleans, Louisiana. She's the Director of the Rehabilitation Center and the Spasticity Program at Children's Hospital in New Orleans. Her special interests include neurorehabilitation, neuromuscular disorders, and clinical applications and research in novel uses of botulinum toxin and intrathecal baclofen in the care of children and young adults with abnormal tone. Dr. Tilton has extensive scientific publications on numerous topics and has spoken nationally and internationally on child neurology, rehabilitation, and spasticity management. Anne was the president of the Child Neurology Society, president of the Child Neurology Foundation, and presently she is the vice president of the board of directors of the American Academy of Neurology. So thank you, Anne, for being here with us today through this virtual platform. I know it's not the same as we planned to be with you there in New Orleans. So please help me welcome Dr. Ann Henderson Tilton.
Thank you and good afternoon. It is a privilege and an honor to be here today to present this lecture at the American Academy of Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine. I wish I could welcome you actually physically to New Orleans, but please accept my welcome even if it is virtually. I do feel like I'm surrounded by individuals with common interests that share the interest of the care of children with disabilities and with cerebral palsy. I do feel that it's been a privilege and it's been truly a fortunate part of my career that I've been able to work in this field and watch it evolve, to work with the people, many of you who are here today, that I consider colleagues and clearly I consider friends. But I do want to thank especially Dr. Mauricio Delgado, who has been a lifelong friend. And he has invited me to work with him on many projects, and I indeed am better for it. And I really, truly appreciate this opportunity. Now, I hope that he is ready for somewhat of an unconventional talk, but that's kind of what happens when you come to New Orleans. So today we're going to talk about the neurology of voodoo. And I think you're going to find that it really relates to your everyday life, to your clinical experience. And it may sound as a surprise, but a lot of the patients that you deal with other spiritual systems, much like this. So let's begin by talking about mystery and history, how our beliefs impact our lives and those we touch, and to recognize that our words matter. Truly what we say and how we interact with our patients will make a difference in their outcome. So the lens that we're going to use, I've already given you a little hint, is going to be the neurology of voodoo. And what we're going to do is to learn what it teaches us about our world and how we can apply it. So there are blurred boundaries in any system such as this, in which we have religion, social, and biologic impact on what we do and how our patients receive it. So we're going to talk about pain, nocebo, placebo, sudden and inevitable death, and potentially a little bit about possessions. So we have to talk about the historical basis of voodoo in order to understand it. This was based on beliefs that came out of West Africa, and in that belief system, fate is predetermined. Not that it isn't particularly not predetermined in a lot of the things that we do in our world, such as tarot cards, but the difference is that having the ability to alter your fate gives you power in a somewhat powerless situation, which is certainly a thing that one would want if they were enslaved people. So to counteract evil forces, one needs a priest or a medicine man in order to do that. And if one has that, then they're not at the mercy of evil. They have a system to combat evil. So I'm going to take you through this system for a moment. You can see the pyramid in which there is a supreme being at the top. At the bottom are the social groups, or just the individuals. In order to have someone speak to the supreme being, then there were deities or gods. These were things such as fire, water, spirits of all sorts, and that was the way to interact and ask for special favors. These essentially were guardian angels. There were little angels and large angels and good and bad, but overall that's how it worked. And then there were your ancestors, and the ancestors actually were part of a continuum of life, that living, to be born, and those who've already died are on a long continuum. And so even the table would be set at dinner for the ancestors, even though they may have already died. Priests and intermediaries are a very important part of these social groups, and how they were structured in West Africa and often disrupted when it came to the United States, or, as you'll see, to many other countries. So what about that slave trade? Between 1619 and 1861, there was an estimate of 25 million enslaved individuals who were taken to these countries. You can see predominantly down in Brazil in that area, into the Caribbean also was the other major area. Now, what happened was in the late 1700s, there was an insurrection in Haiti. And with that, a lot of people left and actually came into the United States, and specifically into New Orleans. So think back about what this must have been like. This is a new world. It was frightening. It was hostile. You no longer had those systems that gave one security, such as your ancestors, the rest of your family. And it was not considered inappropriate to accept new loas, new godlike figures, not the ultimate God, but new deities. And in fact, if these people were enslaved, then those people who took them must have had stronger loas or guardians. So if we look at the serpent Diada, it was very close to St. Patrick. If we look at Papa Leba, the guardian of entrances, St. Peter, and it continued down the line of these type of loas to where it fit very well into Catholicism because there were saints. Not only that, there were talismans, as you see on your lower right, and they continued to use those. So here are some of the talismans for some of the loas here, and you'll see them later. But it integrated into Catholicism, and this is the talisman for the Pope, who is the pontiff, who is the bridge, much like we decided or spoke about on the loas. So this system did well. Voodoo was an open practice until about the mid-1800s. At that point, it was clearly judged to be inappropriate. It went basically under the radar, if you will, and at that point, it emerged even more so as Catholicism. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about a fascinating character who was Marie Laveau, just to give you a feel for the magnitude of what was going on. She lived from 1794 to 1881, and then I said 1915. Well, that's because her daughter, who was identical to her, actually lived that many more years, about 34 more years. So people thought that she was in fact immortal because she went through that. During that time in which it was not allowed to practice voodoo, she emerged as the high priestess. She added prayers, saints, candles, holy water, and in fact, she had such a following that people would not even set their ships out to sail in the Northeast without getting her blessing. So she was powerful for both good and ill. She turned court cases. She did other things such as that. But here's another picture of her. But she did have extreme power. Here's one of the examples of one of the loas. These are triplets. Now, was she truly immortal? Well, no. As I mentioned, her daughter carried on what she was doing. But this has had a long impact in New Orleans, even to this day. This is her grave in St. Louis, number 1, and you can see marks on it because people still go to this day and put marks on that asking for favors from her. Here's an example of some of the altars that were set out and someone asking for some form of a favor. Still practicing, and you can see here on your left is an altar, and here on your right is it being practiced actually at Jazz Fest. So it's still current. You could hear some of the noise initially, or the music, I should say, initially that was going along with it. So let's take it to the next case. Can belief in voodoo alleviate pain? Because these people are seeking it for medical care. So a 40-year-old woman consults a priest for severe back pain. The priest invokes an incantation with the help of aloha and applies a stinging, tingling salve. So let's see what happens. The pain is completely gone by the next morning. So now we have to explain how that could possibly happen. Why did that salve work? This is the mechanism of response to pain and the mechanism of response to therapy. So any medical treatment actually has two components. One is the specific effect of the treatment. The other is the perception that the treatment is being administered, either for good or for bad. So the fact that it is being received psychologically has an impact on it. So the modulation of nociceptive systems we know is central, we know it's peripheral, all of us have come across that. The gate theory of rubbing after you have some injury. And that may increase or decrease pain perception. So the effectiveness of the ineffective is where I'm going to go now. So is it possible that something that is an ineffective medication, a sham if you will, is effective? And that's where placebo comes. But is it truly a sham? So placebo has psychological and biological components. And historically, the terminology really goes all the way back to the Hebrews and biblical references. But what it says in the Latin is, I shall please. Nocebo, which is a term you need to learn as well, is I shall harm. And just to make things more confusing, there's something called placebo, which is that one receives a medication that's truly active, and yet they anticipate they get a placebo, and it's not as effective. We'll come back to that. So now, what about this nocebo effect? 1 in 20 patients that are treated with placebo in studies withdraw due to adverse events. So they received a medication that was not active, and yet 5% feel that they had an adverse event. So it calls attention to the use of a sham drug, and what matters is not the drug itself, but the changes in the brain. So historically, in the Middle Ages, people would hire mourners because it meant that you were of high status if you had a lot of people who were very sad when you died. And these people would go and wail and cry, but in fact, they were just hired. And what they were called were placebos. So it was not real. Historically, also, the first double-blind placebo-controlled study probably dates back to 1784. It's very interesting. At that point, there was a man named Franz Mesmer, and he was doing animal magnetism, mobilizing fluid channels in people, and curing multiple diseases. He had a large following, one of whom was Marie Antoinette. Well, Louis XVI saw otherwise and said, I need some real scientists in here to see what's real. So they brought in Benjamin Franklin and Joseph Guillotine, and they ran a trial. Of course, what happened was that who received the real Mesmer and those who didn't were identical, and he was exposed as a fraud, and they said that the people were mesmerized, and that's why they thought it had worked. And indeed it did at that point. I often point out that Joseph Guillotine later separated King Louis XVI from his head. Same individual, his invention. Now, psychological explanation. Classical conditioning, or Pavlov, and then Freud was involved in all of this as well, but the clinical setting has an effect. Nocebo, for instance, if someone's getting chemotherapy and they go into the room where it took place, they probably become nauseated without even receiving the medication. Placebo, many examples of people who have had something like a protocol where there is conditioning with a placebo analgesic cream. And if they thought it was real, they did not experience pain, where if they thought that it wasn't real, they did. Or if people were told that it in fact was something that would make the pain worse, it would result in more. But overall, a conditioned belief that in fact it would relieve pain. So what if the subject believes the healer, then the improvement will occur. The placebo effect in double-blind placebo-controlled studies is up to 50%. So now imagine you're doing a triptan study, and we're going to do a little bit more diving into this, and 20 to 40% of the people who received the inert compound had an effect. Well, how do you separate out what was real and what wasn't real, or what was a different mechanism of the same effect? That's the key, because now the statistics become very tricky. So what does make a difference if you're influencing the placebo effect? Well, pill size makes a difference. In fact, pill color, pill number, and a capsule is better than a tablet, and it's even better if it costs a lot of money. So that is something to remember. How many times have you had someone, when you say, just take some Motrin or some Tylenol or something else, just to ibuprofen, to work, they go, oh, no, that never works. I need a prescription. If you gave them a prescription, particularly a capsule, it probably will work much better. The mode of administration is important. If it's by shot, it's better than getting a pill. If it's by IV, it's better than getting a shot in terms of efficacy. And something very, very important if you're treating patients, they need to see they're getting the medication. Example, there's an IV, and if you're giving an IV pain medication, you need to wake the patient up in the middle of the night and show them that they're getting their pain medication. When it is unseen, the pain medicine requires 6 to 8 milligrams more of morphine to get the same effect. So you essentially can drop your dose by awakening the patients. Now, this will come back around when we're trying to figure out how to separate the placebo effect from the actual efficacy of the medication. But this effect is blocked by naloxone, which gives more credence to the fact that it's an opiate effect, and that would block it. What about surgery? Well, surgery is the ultimate big pill, and there are actually sham surgical examples where they were doing mammary vessels for bypass, for angina. It was working because they said, oh, the heart must be getting more blood. But they found that if they just cut the skin and stitched back up, that they had the same efficacy. Likewise, injecting cement into vertebra for vertebral pain, if they just took them into the room with the smell and put the injected, it didn't matter that they injected nothing, they had the same effect. But what about the patient and doctor interaction? What we know is expectations are important, the time spent is important, the enthusiasm of how you interact with your patient is incredibly important, and it's most effective if you wear a white coat as a physician and a stethoscope. So what do we do now? We cut the time, we turn our backs, we type on computers, and the effect of the efficacy of what you're doing drops precipitously. However, if you're in an emergency room and all of this is gone, that's the ultimate. Now, let's look at the real underpinnings of this. So is there a chemical substrate for placebo and it's blocking specifically of pain? We can use other examples as well. Well, it turns out that there's secretion of endogenous opioids, and if you did a spinal tap on someone who is experiencing a real placebo effect, you'll get 2 times the beta endorphins. And it's reversed by naloxone, once again proving it's an opiate. Now, the other thing about this that's so interesting is that it doesn't only affect beta endorphins, and there are some cannabinoid receptors approach too, but it also acts on the 5-HT system. And oh, by the way, those triptans, those headache medicines are the 5-HT system. So when you are using placebo as a control, you're interacting with the same mechanisms. Placebo can decrease the respiratory rate, it can reduce the heart rate, it can increase growth hormone, it can decrease cortisol. All of that's proven. So what's CCK, cholecystokinin? This is the opposite. This is something that with anxiety causes the blocking of the placebo effect. So if you do an anti-CCK, then you might see more placebo. It was confused for a while that maybe that was a pain medicine. It was not. It just is what allows or blocks the placebo effect. So what about PET scans? Imaging is always good. And what's fascinating is that the opioid or placebo-induced analgesia overlay each other. They overlap. The same areas, rostral, anterior cingulate cortex, orbital frontal cortex, and periaqueductal gray, are influenced by both the activation of the mu-opioid receptors. And fascinating work with Parkinson's disease where they had patients and they were monitoring them, and if they thought that they received DOPA and they believed it, then all of a sudden the rigidity, as you can see in the upper right, dropped. The patients were evaluated by physicians who said they were better. If they did not believe it, it had no influence. To the point of where they were doing single cell monitoring into the striatum, and you can see on your left, before placebo and after, it actually changes the firing rate of the neurons. The fetal transplant study is fascinating as well, and what it showed was that quality of life improved with the fetal cell transplants, not as to whether or not you received the transplant, but in fact, if you believed you received it, your believed group of assignment is what made the difference in the quality of life. So what about psychological factors? Where are we there? Well, we know that stress aggravates pain or triggers it. We know that strong emotions can blunt pain. We have examples of people lifting cars, lifting people, soldiers walking out on broken legs with gunshot wounds, all of this, so it can affect it. What about sociocultural? Same thing, strong emotion reversed with naloxone, again, going through the placebo system. And so Voodoo can remove pain, working through that system. And in fact, the fear of pain can sometimes be worse than the pain itself, because what are we doing? We're activating the cholecystokinin. Now, other things, the placebo, therefore, is activated the endorphin system. The nocebo is mediated by anxiety-induced activation of the CCK, and that's where the negative expectations come from. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about clinical trials. There is incredible importance of the placebo. Comparing two active medications, for instance, in headache and pain trials, can be a real problem if it's a placebo. Example here is the ketorolac with meperidine and placebo. They all were equal. Well, that's because the placebo effect overlapped with what they had here. If they'd only done it head-to-head, they would say that those pain medications had no efficacy whatsoever. What about open and hidden protocols? I alluded to this a moment ago, that wake your patient up if you want them to have less pain. So how do you decide ethically, if you can decide if it's the effect of the medicine or it's a placebo? If you give it in a hidden circumstance, then that means that whatever the effect was without the placebo effect. If there's a large difference, it's placebo-like. If it's the same, hidden or open, then it would be essentially the same. So hidden is important if you want to do that, and they're now exploring it on an ethical basis. So here's some other issues. Clinical research effect, and what about this? So let's talk about migraines, and now we're back to that nocebo frequency. And I want you to kind of guess what you would put in as the answers here. How frequently do you think giving the sham medication in this circumstance would lead to side effects that were thought to be negative? So, for instance, for symptomatic migraine, 18% of the patients who received the sham drug had negative side effects, and it led to 0.3 dropping out. What about migraine prevention? 43% of the people had bad side effects, 5% dropping out, 1 in 20. Epilepsy, 61% with a dropout rate. How about multiple sclerosis? 74% of people had bad side effects from a medicine that had no medicine in it. Parkinson's, 65%, with almost 10% of the patients in the trial dropping out. Neuropathic pain, 52%, and depression, 57%. So this points out how important it is to realize the effect of nocebo and placebo. What about the way we do things? Clinical practice, informed consents, we tell them everything negative, and what do they get? They get headaches, they get vomiting. What else do they get? In the statins, when they didn't tell them they were getting a statin, it was only about 5%. When they said you're getting a statin, 30 or 40% of the people had side effects. Also encouraging one, trust, and a positive attitude about the benefit also improves your outcome. So if you're doing a spinal tap, you say, look, not that it's a bee sting, but I'm going to give you medicine that's going to make it better. This will tell us a lot of information. This will be incredibly important. Obviously, having to tell what it is important too. But there can be learned responses, just the smells, the white coat. Babies of diabetic mothers just smelling alcohol will start screaming because they anticipate what's coming. Leaflets and media are not our friend. They have to tell you everything, even on TV, everything including death, and we have to put that on our consents as well. So why did the voodoo work in this case? Well, maybe it was just a natural remission. Maybe that night, that day, it happened. Probably not. Well, what about it being placebo with a very big pill? The expectations were good. They went to someone who has power and could do it. There was a peripheral stimuli, so there was even more, much like those creams. And maybe it was just an effective treatment. It's always a possibility. So all of those things go into the thought of why and how and what we should do with our patients in order to help them. So I want to change topics just a little bit and take us over to something called sudden death. Now, this too sounds like, oh, that must be part of some outside spirituality or religion. But instead, it really is something that you'll see that we have influence on our patients about. So here we are, high stimulation, selected by the sorcerer, and the individual falls over. Now, can it happen? Here's an example of a 23-year-old woman who presented on her birthday to an emergency room stating she was going to die. Her sisters at age 21 and 22 had died, and so she begged to be admitted, and indeed they admitted her for observation. So what do you think happened the next day? She was found dead the next morning, and there are many examples of this. So in exploring it in the 40s, a man named Cannon published Voodoo Death. Cases from all over the world, he just coined it that title, but obviously voodoo was not across the world, other systems were there. But it's a real phenomenon. But the big question is, what's in common with all of these things? Absolute belief that there's an external force that can do this, and that the victim has no power to alter it. In other words, hopelessness, and that it's overwhelming. Applications to our world, patient may say, I'm going to die. I don't know if y'all have had that experience, but I can name two, even when I was a medical student, where I'd been following someone for a long time, went by one day, and he said, I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. And he'd been in the hospital for months. I said, oh, don't say that. No, come on, you're almost done. You're almost done. 2 days later, he was gone. Likewise, a young woman my age, actually, at the time, said, no, I'm going to die. And she was gone on the Monday I returned. So it can happen. What about poor guy, no hope? In the operating room where people report hearing that and they succumb. Omaha Beach, a terrible, terrible circumstance. And there are documented people who died on the beach who were never struck by a bullet or anything else, no external injuries. And also assault with death and only minor injuries. So in the context of neurologic diseases, how could this happen? What could this do? Well, the EKG changes in patients with neurologic disorders sometimes can be documented, in fact, frequently documented with ischemia, aneurysms, subarachnoid hemorrhages, coma, stroke. And indeed, there's no pathology evidence of ischemia. It just looks like a heart attack. But if there's a brain death, the EKG reverses. So there is a direct brain-to-heart mechanism of this. Is it rare? Well, in a series of 100 stroke patients, think about how many you think must do this because it sounds so strange. 90% of these patients had EKG changes. Now, some may have also had a heart attack, but that speaks to the frequency of this. Just to give you an insight of what this is, it appears that the changes are directly related to intracardiac nerves, that the brain's mechanism actually affects the heart. And if you're farther away from that nerve, then you have less changes, although it is ultrastructurally in every cell. So it's very different than an MI. It changes within minutes, and it can cause arrhythmias because of the location. Are there other models? Yes. Capture, transfer myopathy is seen in animals. I think if you were that poor, unfortunate zebra, you would rather not be alive if the lion's really going to have you for dinner. So they die suddenly. Even transferring animals who have broken their legs and other things, they will die because they get a capture myopathy, is what it's called. Now, death from fright and restraint, autonomic hyperactivity, but it's not blocked by blocking adrenal function. Normal catecholamines, it seems to be direct neural function. So what about stress? Well, it can produce the same lesion. 15 victims with assault died of assault without internal injuries. 11 of them had this degeneration. I always tell this story about stress. So Takotsubo, probably many of y'all have heard of this, dysfunction predominantly after emotional stress. It looks like an octopus trapping pot. So I asked my husband, as a cardiologist, how often do you see it? He goes, oh, not that often. I said, well, how many? He goes, well, we didn't have more than a dozen last year. Well, this is part of our lives. And at the time of natural disasters, certainly we are in a pandemic right now, you have to wonder. So it's seen with neurologic or psychiatric catastrophes, even a role in SUDEP, drug abuse, asthma, grief, and war. So there is inevitable death as well, where someone becomes isolated and weaker, as this person points out. Her diagnosis was she had been cursed. And folk medicine has two forms, natural and unnatural from hexes. And obviously the voodoo doll with contagion magic becomes important because once something is attached to you, it is always used. So it can be attached to the voodoo doll, the extension of the person, hence the pins. Well, does it happen in the current Western world? Yes. Look at this, hopelessness. In this case, the family withdraws, the individual becomes an outsider, much like we see in this religious work on the bottom in the Middle Ages. And in fact, churches, exorcisms, these sort of things where someone is banished can often lead to the same thing. So is it possible that our patients are being really cursed by what we do? Well, we have power, we're the authority. The family and the patient believe us. They have no control, and then often it happens where the family withdraws, and then we go, oh, let's don't go see him today. Well, let's leave him alone. Then we withdraw, and the patient may die without even the biologic expectations. So examples are voodoo and Western world, even people who live and then die after their birthdays or natural disasters, all are in effect. So today we've been talking about nocebo, placebo, placebo, even sudden death, even the psychogenic components of this. So it directly influences our social, psychological, and biological means. All of these things are interwoven. So I'm curious, have your beliefs changed? A belief system really offers control over what is seen as uncontrollable. One can understand why a spiritual system helps. Look closely at what you think is other, because maybe it's in your own backyard. And understand and learn. So voodoo is specific to this area in the Caribbean and West Africa, but down in Texas, there are curanderos. We even have traiteurs who are Cajun, whose powers don't cross the bayous. So there can be several traiteurs who are healers. Be aware that of the value that other cultures and beliefs bring to us as well. And above all, allow the patient and family to maintain dignity and to understand that they're probably being influenced by more than what you're saying. So one of my favorite philosophers said this: the problem is not with what you see, the problem is with what you recognize. And that's Sherlock Holmes. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you soon when we all can get together, and I hope that we can have a little bit more conversation even today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne. I want to thank you for that very interesting and thought-provoking talk. I know when we have drug studies in our practice, we have a placebo and other kids are getting drugs, and even our patients that are getting the placebos, their parents will always tell you, oh, I think he got more skills or he's getting better and things like that. So there's definitely an effect that is done just because they're in a trial. And the first question was, do you ask about other religious practices or cultural beliefs and activities like voodoo and use relationship to treating, managing disorders in your patients and families?
Well, I often ask people taking things or doing things separate from what I've offered. And I think that this is very similar to medications, that people are reluctant to talk about it. And I ask them and if they are doing that sort of thing. I'm hearing a lot of echo. I apologize. So I think that people are reluctant. And so if you give them a safe location, a safe opportunity, did this, we had someone come and do an exorcism. And I was like, oh. So I said, well, I'm going to call a psychologist. And you call your people. And they came and they laid on hands. And, of course, it wasn't a true exorcism, but the child believed in it. And they were fine the next day and went home.
Okay, can you hear me now, right now?
I can. It's kind of an echo.
Okay, so the next question is, what about parental expectations for the response? Is there a placebo effect in what they are seeing, interpreting as an effect?
Yeah, I think so. I think that parents, particularly if they've worked with you for a while or you have a good relationship, want it to work. So number one, they're going to be hopeful, which is the enthusiasm and the hopeful side. And so I think that if they believe they got it or they hope they got it, then they would have a positive influence. Even if they got the medication and they didn't think they did, then you get the placebo and they won't be as effective. So I do think parents have an influence on this. Children may be a little bit more honest. And much like that hidden protocol, giving the medication without someone knowing they received it will actually offer what the efficacy of the medication was.
Yeah. I feel like I'm very lost here. I'm in a virtual room with nobody. Sorry.
Same.
So do you find ever that there's a time when the parent perceives the patient is getting something and the patient that's actually getting it sees no effect?
Yes. This may even be in our common practices, because if we're doing injections or we're doing something else, the child may be able to say, I don't notice much difference. The therapist can show it. The gait pattern can show it. There are a lot of things that show it really does have some improvement. I can't help but think that if the child isn't thinking it's working, it probably has negative influence on anything that we do. But often I ask people when we start out with this kind of conversation, you can understand the influence of this, for instance, when and it may be because dystonia does this, but when I'm doing injections, sometimes I'll have a patient who says, or the parent will say, oh my gosh, she's already better. And that's before she gets off the table.
Wow.
And it probably is the influence of the needling, is the influence of all these other things. But the family's convinced that before they leave my clinical space, that they're much better. I do believe dystonia does make a difference like that pretty fast. But there's no way, if you're using a botulinum toxin, that the true muscle effect can be within that period of time. So it's got to be something else. Maybe dystonia, but also it may be the positive influence.
Okay, I'm going to go back to a question that you answered before, and it's how much of the placebo effect is dependent on the patient's expectations, and how might it change in a person with intellectual disability?
In someone who doesn't have insight into the fact that this could have the influence, isn't going to have some of that influence from a placebo. That would be hard to judge, but all in all, the families may well think that it worked and have that kind of influence, thinking that it did make a difference. But if it's a direct medication measure, it probably would be much more like giving a hidden medication. But still, if they like you may have some positive influence.
Okay, the next question is, considering the strong impact of cultural beliefs on response to treatments, do you think that medical training should include cultural sensitivity training to increase open-mindedness and cultural awareness?
Oh, I totally believe that. I think that we think that the way that we practice is the only way that makes people better. I think that we frequently will go, oh, you aren't going to believe what they're doing, without recognizing how important it is that these people are doing that. And a lot of patients, whether it's a voodoo in a belief system or whether they're just going to get naturopathic medications, I suppose a lot of y'all have seen someone who got CBD oil from somewhere and said it's really working. Because this stuff, as coming off of the internet, may well just be sugar water. But the perception is it works. And so therefore it does work. But I do believe that we minimize other cultural systems. We're talking about diversity here. We're talking about inclusiveness. We're talking about multicultural approaches to people who are underrepresented in medicine frequently, which is really where our focus should be for inclusion, because it clearly affects their long-term health care. So, yes, I think we need to learn more about dietary things. I think we need to learn more about those medications so that if the patient comes in and they're taking, I'll have people that bring out a scroll of medications and, I'm not sure what a lot of these things are. And could they have an interaction with your medicines? Yes. And could they be toxic at high levels? Yes. So, and sometimes things will come out and say they've been banned by the FDA and such because they have shown a. So they get an effect because of the placebo effect, and yet the side effects may be very bad. We have to know that. But I'm sorry, I've kind of gone afield of that, but there's no question that there should be more understanding and acceptance of the systems that people bring with them because they're powerful. And if you reject it, then they'll probably feel rejected.
Okay, well, I've learned that we're way over, so I want to thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate your very interesting talk. And I know it will challenge us all to think a little bit differently when we go back and practice. So thank you very much. And we're sorry we're not with you in New Orleans.
Well, we just need to reschedule.
Okay. Well,
I'll do the zombies the next time. We'll do zombies.
Okay. That sounds perfect. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Lifetime Achievement Award. field of medicine and for the benefit of children with cerebral palsy and other childhood onset disabilities. It is with great honor that I have the opportunity to introduce this year's recipient, Dr. Michael Sussman. I've worked with Dr. Sussman for the past 28 years, and during this time, I've seen the impact that he has made in the areas of patient care, education, and research, all directed towards the enhancement of care for individuals with cerebral palsy and other childhood onset disabilities. Dr. Sussman attended medical school at the University of Maryland and completed his orthopedic residency at Johns Hopkins University. Prior to completing his pediatric orthopedic fellowship at Boston Children's Hospital, he pursued basic science research at the NIH. In 1976, he joined the Division of Pediatric Orthopedic Surgery at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, where he remained until 1992. He then moved to Portland, Oregon to become the Chief of Staff at the Shriners Hospitals for Children. Upon arrival at Shriners, Dr. Sussman's first order of business was to alter our clinic structure to ensure continuity of care for the patients. He developed care teams around specific diagnoses in order to provide each patient with a comprehensive team of experts that would follow them until their graduation from the Shrine. This team approach provided the patient and their family clinicians who had knowledge about the latest diagnostics and treatments. Known for wearing bow ties, Dr. Sussman is a compassionate clinician who cares not just about their medical needs, but their lives and emotional well-being. Dr. Sussman is a leader in the clinical care of patients with muscular dystrophy, as evidenced by his participation in the development of treatment guidelines. His impact on children with neuromuscular disorders was recognized in 2013 when he was awarded the Medical Honoree Award from the Muscular Dystrophy Association for both his impact through research and clinically on the lives of boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. His personal dedication to sharing his knowledge can be seen through his interactions with his colleagues, residents, and fellows. His wealth of knowledge on childhood disorders is openly shared during grand rounds, motion lab meetings, and each and every day in the clinic. To this day, he can be found in the motion lab meeting, teaching the residents about gait and how to use the motion lab as a powerful tool to enhance their understanding of gait pathology in order to provide the best treatment plan for the patient. He also teaches them the importance of evaluating the patient again post-operatively, as he feels it's very important to critically examine your outcomes and learn from what worked well and what didn't, so that you can improve your care for future patients. He shares his knowledge and experiences and challenges others to evaluate the options for care for each child. He's always had a strong interest in educating our international fellows, not only teaching them about pediatric orthopedics, but life in general. Not only did he want them to gain the clinical knowledge they would need when they returned home, he really wanted them to experience Portland. He could often be seen taking them to the farmers market, Multnomah Falls, and other Oregon landmarks. As many of our fellows have gone on to be leaders in clinical care and research in their countries, he continues to share his knowledge around the globe as a keynote speaker. Shortly after his arrival in Portland, Dr. Sussman started the clinical research department in order to critically evaluate the efficacy of the treatments offered to children with disabilities. He's had grants examining the efficacy of SDR in orthopedic surgery, comparison of AFOs for children with cerebral palsy, and a multi-center grant examining strength, gait, energy, and function in boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. He has won several awards for his academic and clinical service, including the Gail G. Arnold and the Arthur H. Hune Award. Through his dedication to patient care, education, and research, he has made a significant impact on his colleagues, residents, and fellows. But he's had the biggest impact on the children and families he has so genuinely cared for over the years. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Michael Sussman, my mentor, my colleague, and my friend. Please join me in congratulating him on receiving the 2020 AACPDM Lifetime Achievement Award.
I'm very pleased to be here with you today to receive this Lifetime Achievement Award. It's a fantastic cap to the conclusion of my career. I'm going to talk to you today not about what I've done, but about what I've learned over the past 46 years of practice in pediatric orthopedics. That's me pre-COVID hair. I know that you can hit this mute button at any time, so I'll try and keep it entertaining as well as hopefully useful to you. I started my career at the University of Virginia, not practicing in this building, the beautiful rotunda designed by Mr. Jefferson, but during that time, I did learn some really critical issues that had not been addressed during my residency and fellowship. One was the multidisciplinary team approach, so critical for the type of children that we deal with, and the other was family-centered as opposed to physician-centered care. There have been some major advances in the orthopedic treatment of children since I started practice. I've listed a few of the most outstanding ones here, and just going to focus on two. The first is the tremendous increase in understanding of the progressive neuromuscular diseases, and in particular, focus on spinal muscular atrophy, which prior to 1997, we knew it affected the anterior horn cell, but we didn't know exactly where the gene was. And this was ascertained in 1995. And from that information, with technological advances and a lot of hard work, the mechanism of gene dysfunction was identified, and this led to the development of a strategy for correction of gene dysfunction, a treatment. And there are now 3 treatments available, which are amazingly effective and have changed the lives considerably for children and families affected with this condition. The other is Ponseti treatment of clubfoot, which, in contrast to the SMA story, didn't require a lot of technological improvement or increase in knowledge, but just an increase in the appreciation of the anatomical basis of clubfoot and innovative thinking by Dr. Ponseti, who developed a treatment based on this, which is effective and has totally changed the treatment of clubfoot for babies all over the world. And as opposed to many innovators, he didn't capitalize on this financially, but actually invested a lot of his own funds in disseminating this information in courses around the world. In 1992, I moved, following the footsteps of Lewis and Clark, to Portland, Oregon, to the Shriners Hospital as the chief of the medical staff, a wonderful facility with great staff and supported by the Shriners organization, who make sure that no child is denied care because of lack of funds. I'm going to talk during the rest of this talk about what's been most important to me during the course of my career and separate this into the 3 major areas of academic practice, and also talk a bit about what I've learned in these areas. So first, clinical care. Clearly, technical success is paramount, that this is what we're trained to do, to use surgery or other interventions to correct deformities, to improve function, and you have to achieve this without excessive complications in order to do what you're trained to do. So in clubfoot, in 6 weeks with 6 casts and perhaps a small operation, you can change a foot that looks like that on the left to the one on the right. And this is still miraculous to me, how easy it is as compared to what we used to do. You can see that this makes babies happy, makes doctors happy, families happy. So it's really been a huge advance in pediatric orthopedics, and many children have avoided huge operations because of this innovation. But the technical outcome, although it's obviously critically important, isn't everything. I think it's, while I was reviewing the slides for this talk, that I realized that there's another dimension. And perhaps this was in my subconscious, but not necessarily in my conscious thought. And that is when you're seeing these babies once a week for 6 weeks and several times over the next year, and perhaps 6 monthly or yearly thereafter for several years, you get to know the families, you get to see the babies grow up, and this is really kind of a very satisfying part of the practice. I mean, it's really satisfying to be able to correct the foot, but it's also very satisfying to get to know the people involved. Here's another patient with spinal muscular atrophy type 2. The first one who I did a Lukey sublaminar wiring on and fusion for his collapsing scoliosis, which was a great technical achievement for me at the time. And he maintained good sitting balance. His dad made sure to keep up with me and send me yearly Christmas cards with some photos and clippings like this at his high school graduation, and this photo of his high school graduation trip with the Twin Towers in the background, which is a little eerie. And subsequent to this, he finished college and went on to work in the office of his congressman in Washington, D.C. So I take that as a big success. Here's another patient, 8-year-old, with mild right spastic hemiplegia. You can see she walks a little bit up on her toe, keeps her arm postured. She had reduced hand function. And so I did some surgery on her with what I thought was a good outcome. And here, a number of outcome measures, which are all important to assess the technical outcome, including the PODCI, which does address satisfaction and some functional issues not addressed by these totally technical outcome measures. But this is also important. 20 years later, she found my email address and sent me this photo of her wedding. And 2 years later, sent me this photo with her baby and this great note. I think it's probably a little exaggeration that it wouldn't have been possible without me, but perhaps I did play a small role. But I think the major role was that she was very self-sufficient. She had a great self-image, and she wouldn't let anything stop her. And I think that's really the most important thing. This was contrasted with a friend of mine who had a total knee replacement, and she saw her surgeon in the preoperative visit for an assessment and booking for the surgery, saw him the morning of surgery, and hasn't seen him thereafter and is not planning on it. All of the postoperative visits have been done by a physician's assistant. And it really saddens me because I think this is a terrible way to practice medicine, that you're really more of a technician than you are of a doctor, and you miss this huge dimension of interaction with your patients and really getting to see your follow-ups, except perhaps the complications. So it's financially more beneficial, but I think this is probably why people talk about burnout, because they're just doing the same technical exercises over and over again. So when you listen to your patients, you'll learn a lot of important things from them. This, I think, is self-explanatory. done by a boy with Duchenne dystrophy, expressing how frustrating it is not to be able to participate with his peers. This is a young man who I operated on several decades ago, the first patient that I operated on for scoliosis with Duchenne dystrophy, who came from a fairly rural background, but actually became pretty sophisticated as he grew up and raised money and successfully led to the opening of an assisted living facility for young adults. And when this happened and I sent him a donation, he sent me back a letter, called me Dear Mike, a little bit of a change in our relationship. You'll see things in life that you can't have, and that's a hard burden to bear. You've got to be strong to live like that. In contrast to the young girl with hemiplegia, this is a young man with hemiplegia, very nice, personable, supportive parents, and graduated college. He wrote me a letter after he had graduated college that he went in for job interviews based on his CV. And as soon as he walked in the door of the office with the interviewer and saw the interviewer focus in on his hemiplegic arm, he knew he wasn't going to get the position, and this was very frustrating for him. So I think many of our studies miss an important parameter, and that's aesthetics, how it looks. And this determines how patients feel about themselves and how they feel that they look to others. And it's not only just the static physical appearance, but the dynamic appearance, how their gait looks. Does it look very abnormal? So this may be a more important outcome measure than many of the others that we use. And like the young woman who got married, it's really how the patients perceive others feel about them. And I think you can help this by being a cheerleader. Instead of talking about how much, say, persistent wrist flexion they have, talk about the positive things that have happened and continue to provide positive feedback to the patient and family every time you see them. Even for the severely involved children, you can find something positive to say. This is my favorite painting by Van Gogh called First Steps. Shows mom bringing the baby out to the garden to show dad the first steps. And with our patients, it's not this easy. It's usually delayed. They may have orthotics, they may have received physical therapy or even surgery. So be sensitive to the needs of the family and be positive with them every time you see them. Learning to care for children with CP and other neuromuscular diseases is a little bit like cultivating bonsai. It takes decades, and then at the end of this time, you still don't have all the answers, trust me. I've been fortunate to be able to do research during my career. Early on, I did some basic research, but subsequently, clinical research. Finding out what outcomes your patients have achieved, and not just individual patients, but groups of patients compared with their preoperative status or similar patients having other sorts of interventions. This girl obviously has spastic diplegia and a lot of obvious gait abnormalities. Here she is a year and a half later, following both bony and more recently soft tissue surgery, and you can see her gait has improved markedly. And here she is 10 years later. She looks great, although she's up on her toes a bit. You could see possibly her shirt that said, "Keep calm and graduate." So she's a normal senior in high school at the time. She did go on to college. And how do we quantitate how well we did? Well, the best way technically is with gait analysis. And don't worry, I'm not going to go through how to analyze these curves, but just to tell you, it's a very powerful tool because it gives you objective information about the patient's gait. And it's a great teaching tool. So we have a conference weekly. The players have changed. This was probably a decade or more ago. But we still have this weekly conference where we have the residents and fellows look at the videos, analyze gait problems, correlate this with the gait curves, come up with problem lists and treatment options. And it's a great medium for instruction of residents, not necessarily in computer gait analysis, but in gait analysis. It's been the basis of much of my clinical research because in addition to seeing individual patient outcomes, you can analyze aggregate outcomes, compare interventions, and publish your findings in medical journals. And here's some of the papers that I've been part of and some of the journals, and present these at medical meetings like the AACPDM, where you can present findings from the podium, but also you end up having a lot of conversations in the hallways and social events where people come up to you to get more information, and you can frequently get more information from them. So although this virtual platform is great, the in-person meeting really has another dimension, which is very important. And there is another issue that you get to meet people both on the faculty and in the audience, and some of these people end up being your lifelong friends. You get to eat sometimes exotic foods, see interesting places, and as I said, I've met people in my professional career who have become my closest friends, and I cherish these friendships and still am in communication with most of these people all the time, and they're wonderful people, and I enjoy and have enjoyed and hope to continue to enjoy my relationship with them. I've been fortunate to be able to have fellows along with the rest of the staff. Here's our first fellow, Corinne Kaloyan, who went back to his home country of Armenia, set up a pediatric orthopedic program where there was none, graduated fellows, and when he graduated his first fellow, he sent me a note saying, I have my first grand fellow. So these fellows have come from all over the world. Here's a group from Israel who came sequentially, and all of these people have gone back and become leaders in pediatric orthopedics in their countries, and it's an incredibly satisfying thing to have done. And this is just some of them. There are more, but these are the ones I could find photographs of. And don't forget, you have wonderful colleagues at home. Children's hospitals seem to attract great people. So recognize this, appreciate them, cherish them, because they're wonderful people who are really dedicated to their jobs. And here again are just a few. There are many more, but these are the ones I could find slides of. And I've been fortunate to have great orthopedic colleagues. This is our group from a visiting professorship a year or two ago. And you can see in the back, they're the senior guys who are fading out. They're the intermediate guys under the leadership of Matt Bernstein, who's done a great job. And this incredible more junior staff who've been there for a couple of years and are enthusiastic, smart, committed, and it's great to be able to pass the torch on to them. And I feel confident they'll bring the institution to new heights. Special shout out to Mike Iona, who has been supportive over the years, and I appreciate his support and friendship. And to Susan and Kathleen, who run our clinical research department, who've been friends, colleagues, co-authors, and without whom I could have never achieved probably 1/10 of what I had in the area of research. They're both committed, and I don't think I've ever heard them say no. So, and of course, all the wonderful patients and families, and the continuing support of the Shriners. So one big mystery remains looming for me, retirement, but What will be, I guess I'll find out. And I'll end how I've begun with one of my patients with Becker muscular dystrophy who loves to drum and does performances with his family's mariachi band.
Thank you, and congratulations again, Dr. Sussman, for receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm pleased at this time to welcome Dr. Eugenia Monasterio to introduce the Gail G. Arnold Award lectureship.
Dr. Gail Arnold was a general pediatrician in Richmond, Virginia. He founded and served as the medical director of the Richmond Cerebral Palsy Center, where he volunteered 30 hours a month while maintaining a busy private practice. He was also served as president of this organization, the AACPDM. The Academy annually identifies one of the presidential guest lectures to be designated as the Gail G. Arnold Lectureship, in part to remind us of the amazing contributions from Dr. Arnold. The funding for this lectureship comes from the Children's Hospital Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Yvonne Wu for this lectureship. Dr. Wu is a child neurologist and professor of neurology and pediatrics at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Wu's research focuses on the prevention and treatment of newborn brain injury in full-term infants. Her goal is to reduce the rate of long-term neurodevelopmental disabilities resulting from insults to the developing brain. Dr. Wu is currently the PI of an ongoing NIH-funded multi-center trial evaluating erythropoietin as a novel neuroprotective treatment for newborn hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. She's also the PI of a multidisciplinary team studying the use of electronic fetal monitoring in predicting newborn encephalopathy. Dr. Wu serves on the editorial boards of Pediatric Neurology and the Journal of Child Neurology. Dr. Wu has published over 80 peer-reviewed papers, including in high-impact journals such as JAMA Pediatrics, the New England Journal of Medicine, Pediatrics, and Annals of Neurology. Dr. Wu's research has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, Cerebral Palsy Alliance, the Thrasser Research Fund, Cerebral Palsy International Research Foundation, and the Gates Foundation. Dr. Wu received her medical degree from Harvard Medical School and her master's in public health from the University of California, Berkeley. She completed her residencies in pediatrics and in child neurology at the University of California, San Francisco. Please welcome Dr. Yvonne Wu.
Thank you. Can you all hear me and see my slide? Yes? Okay, perfect. Thank you all. It's really quite an honor to be invited to speak today here, especially in honor of Dr. Gail Arnold and his legacy. So I will talk to you today about neonatal neuroprotection and really focusing on some of the new therapies that are coming down through the pipeline that are aiming to reduce the risk of CP in infants who have newborn brain injury. Let's see. I have no financial disclosures. I will be talking about some off-label investigational uses of agents that are being studied, such as erythropoietin and melatonin. So for today's talk, I will focus primarily on hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy in term infants. We'll talk first about hypothermia or cooling therapy, and then move on to talk about some of these more experimental therapies that are being studied. But first, what do we mean by neonatal neuroprotection? So what this refers to is if you have a baby who's born who's had some sort of injury or insult to the brain, what can we do to salvage, recover, regenerate the nervous system? And that's not just the cells, also the structure of the brain, and of course the function of the brain. And the goals of the goals of this neuroprotective therapy depend a little bit on the timing. So in the first hours or days, we want to decrease cell death. And then over the ensuing weeks and months, we want to see if we can help the brain repair. And that would include increased cell proliferation, synaptogenesis, or improving the synapses that are formed between nerve cells, and also vascular remodeling. And of course, ideally, one day we will have therapies that will combine both of these goals. So why are we talking about HIE? I think everyone in this audience knows CP is extremely heterogeneous, and this pie chart is extremely oversimplified, but it gives you a sense that about half of kids with CP were born prematurely. We're only going to touch on this slightly later, but we're not going to talk too much about preterm brain injury. About half of kids are born at term, and if you look at those, I'd say probably 15 to 20% have some sort of brain dysgenesis, meaning that the brain formed differently, and that could be due to a genetic cause or some other reason. But the majority of kids have some sort of prenatal or perinatal injury to the brain. And a long list of causes. HIE is the one we're going to talk about. Stroke, infection, and often we really don't know what caused the injury. But the reason I'm going to focus today on HIE is primarily that it's received the largest amount of attention for neuroprotective therapies. So HIE refers to hypoxic, which means reduced oxygen, and ischemic, or reduced blood flow to the baby's brain. It occurs in the US in about 1 to 3 per 1,000 births, and in low and middle income countries, the rate is much higher. It's actually responsible for 1/4 of neonatal deaths worldwide, so it's a real big problem. If untreated, 1/3 will die in the newborn period, and 1/3 will develop cerebral palsy as well as many other neurodevelopmental impairments. And the cause is often not known. So in a minority of cases, a sentinel event or unpredictable sudden event or accident, such as a placental abruption or uterine rupture, that you could point to as to the reason that the baby had decreased blood flow to the brain. And we think infection and inflammation play an important role. But because the cause is often not well understood, we don't really know how to prevent this condition very well. These next 2 slides I wanted to share just to give you a sense as to the types of brain injury that we see in HIE. We tend to see one of 2 patterns of brain injury. The first is injury to the deep gray matter. You can see here the basal ganglia, the thalami, these white areas represent injury. And this typically is seen after a period of really acute and severe cessation of blood flow to the baby's brain. So for instance, in this one study, if you look at cases of HIE where you can point your finger at a sentinel event, you know something happened, like the uterine cord prolapse, that 3/4 of those cases will have this deep gray matter injury pattern. And these structures are really important for motor control, and so kids who have this deep gray injury tend to have severe quadriplegic, dystonic, and choreoathetotic CP. The other pattern that we often see is what we refer to as watershed injury. And that just means that there's a watershed or border zone between the different vascular territories of the brain. And we tend to see this more when there's a more prolonged and partial decreased oxygen and blood flow to the brain. And so if you look at cases of this watershed type of injury, only 10% are preceded by this acute sentinel event. And in this type of injury, CP is less common, but you do tend to get more cognitive impairment, language impairment, visual impairment. Is there okay. So what we do know is that the injury that I just showed you in those MRI scans tends to take time to evolve. And this has been worked out very well in animal studies. We know that after an acute period of hypoxia ischemia, there is a primary energy failure and cell death that occurs within minutes. And there's not much we can do about that. It just, it's very fast, and there's a number of intracellular cascades, and so that's this initial primary energy failure. That is followed, though, by a secondary phase that takes hours to days. And in this case, in the secondary phase, there are a number of intracellular cascades, including apoptosis or programmed cell death, inflammation, release of reactive oxygen species that lead to oxidative stress. There's excitotoxic injury. All of these things take hours to days to do, and these lead to a secondary phase of cell death. And the good news with that is that we actually have time to try to do something to reduce injury during these initial hours and days. There is a tertiary phase. So, if you have injury early on, this can lead to long-term decreased myelin production, decreased synaptogenesis, decreased, neuronal proliferation. We don't really have a lot right now to work on with the tertiary phase, but let's focus today on the secondary phase of injury. So I'm going to talk first about hypothermia. Therapeutic hypothermia refers to cooling a baby's body temperature down. And the reason we do that is that it produces a number of actions in the cell that are quite neuroprotective. So here you have the cell membrane up here, you have a mitochondrion, you have a cell nucleus, and when you cool the baby's body down, it reduces excitotoxic brain injury, so it reduces this glutamate-mediated injury, it reduces inflammation, it reduces oxidative stress, there's less mitochondrial dysfunction, and there's less, what we talked about earlier, this programmed cell death, apoptosis. So therapeutic hypothermia has a large number of mechanisms that make it a very attractive neuroprotective agent. In the 1990s, mostly, a number of clinical trials were done in the US and in other countries around the world. This is a nice review in 2013, and it shows that, indeed, therapeutic hypothermia reduces the risk of neurodevelopmental impairments. So it reduces the risk of death, of major disability, of cerebral palsy, developmental delay. And if you calculate this number needed to treat for cerebral palsy, the number is 8. And what that means is for every 8 infants who have hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, if you treat them with cooling, you can prevent 1 case of cerebral palsy. And there was this nice Cochrane collaboration review of neonatal interventions for reducing the risk of CP, and they found that hypothermia is the only proven intervention. So this was really quite a game changer for all of us. It's now the standard of care for babies who are born with moderate to severe HIE. So we place the infant after birth on a cooling blanket, which is servo-controlled, so there's a temperature probe, and it maintains the baby's body temperature at 33.5 or 92.3 degrees Fahrenheit. It has to be started within 6 hours of age, and babies are cooled for 72 hours before they are rewarmed. And I wanted to just show you the numbers, how helpful this therapy is. So these are numbers from the 3 largest cooling trials, the NICHD trial in the US, the TOBY trial in Europe, and also a CoolCap trial in the US. And what they found was if you cool infants with moderate to severe HIE, they have a lower risk of death or moderate to severe disability and a lower risk of cerebral palsy. And so that was all very exciting. Now, these numbers, of course, are not where we want them to be. We want to have even better therapies. And that's where a lot of the work is being done now. What additional neuroprotective strategies can we add on top of cooling? So at this point, I'd like to shift our attention and talk a little bit about erythropoietin. So erythropoietin is a hormone. It regulates red blood cell production. And in 1985, the gene for erythropoietin was cloned. And by 1989, recombinant EPO was FDA approved. And it is now one of the most widely prescribed medications for treatment of anemia. Shortly after that, in the 1990s, it became clear that EPO receptors were present on brain cells. And in this little diagram, the EPO receptors are represented by the little red rods. And so they are present on neurons, on astrocytes, microglial cells, oligodendrocytes, and on endothelial cells in the brain. And it became clear that EPO signaling was important for normal brain development. So then shortly thereafter, it was found not only as an important agent for movement, but it seems to have neuroprotective effects. And so what was discovered was that when the brain's is exposed to hypoxia, this turns on the HIF1 gene, which then upregulates the EPO gene. And that produces more EPO, and there's also increased upregulation of EPO receptors in the brain. So we think that all of this leads to neuroprotection. And this is a slide that my collaborator Sandra Jewell at University of Washington put together. She's spent and really devoted almost all of her career to studying the effects of EPO on the brain. And what it shows is that acutely, EPO is sort of similar to hypothermia. It has multiple neuroprotective effects. It reduces inflammation, reduces apoptosis, oxidative injury. All of this improves cell survival. But one of the exciting things about EPO is it also has long-term effects. So we know from a growing body of animal work that EPO also leads to increased neurogenesis, oligodendrogenesis, angiogenesis, and of course erythropoiesis. And we think all of these things help in the longer term to have the brain repair itself after hypoxic ischemic injury. So there have been a lot of animal models of hypoxic ischemic brain injury, both in adult and neonatal models. And these are in rodents and sheep, even in non-human primates. And they quite consistently show that EPO improves both structure and function after hypoxia ischemia. So I just wanted to show this one slide as an example of this type of study. This is done by Fernando Gonzalez, who's my collaborator here at UCSF. And he has a rat model where he ligates the carotid artery. So he ties off the carotid artery in the neck on one side, which of course results in a hole on that side of the brain. This slide shows here that in animals that receive 3 doses of EPO on days 1, 2, and 7, that they have this remarkable restoration. It's not normal compared to the other side, but it's relatively spared. And the amazing thing was that when he had these rats subjected to this Morris water maze, that the rats that got 3 doses of EPO performed as well as the normal rats. Here's the rats with 3 doses of EPO. Here's the normal rats who had no injury. They did remarkably well. Interestingly, 1 dose was not enough. So we think that multiple doses are important, high doses are important, and a late dose is important for that repair that we talked about. So given that information, we decided to see if this is something we could bring to the bedside. So the first thing we did was design a phase 1, dose-finding trial. So this was a study where we wanted to figure out what dose to give to newborns. And we studied 4 different doses, and we had a target blood level or plasma range of EPO that we knew from animal studies was the most neuroprotective. And what we found was this dose of 1,000 units per kilo. We gave it several times over the first week. And we found that that dose gave us the best blood levels, and there were no safety concerns. So then we went on and performed a phase 2 trial. And this is a study where we enrolled 50 infants, and we randomized them. It turned out 24 got EPO and 26 got placebo. This was blinded. And what we found was that those that got EPO had a much lower rate of this deep gray matter, the basal ganglia thalamic injury that I talked about earlier. Now, as I mentioned, this part of the brain is important for motor control. So we wanted to know if that made a difference with motor development. And what we did with this small study was follow the kids until 12 months of age. And you can see here that the WIDEA, which is a parental questionnaire, has a mobility scale. The kids scored higher if they got EPO. The kids also were evaluated with the Alberta Infant Motor Scale exam, and they scored higher. So these results were quite exciting to us, but it was a small study. And therefore, we went ahead and embarked on a large definitive phase 3 clinical trial. So this is ongoing work. We have completed enrollment of 500 babies with HIE at 17 hospitals around the country. The study will end in 2022. And what we did was we enrolled them within the first day of life. They're all cooled, that's standard of care. They were randomized to getting either EPO, 1,000 units per kilo, 5 doses, or placebo. And these were given on day 2, 3, 4, and 7 of age. We then follow them through the first couple years of life. And then at years of age, we do a full neurologic exam and Bailey exam. And the hope is that the kids that got EPO will do better. And so stay tuned. We will be finishing up in about 1.5 years. You might be wondering, if I'm talking about how promising EPO is, whether it might be helpful also to other types of newborn brain injury. So I wanted to just address that question. First is that there has been a very large study of EPO for preterm brain injury, the PEANUT trial. It was concluded last fall. It's been just published recently, and unfortunately, it was a negative study. However, one could argue that it was a very difficult trial because they took all preemies who were born at under 28 weeks gestational age. And people are wondering now, well, what if you only look at preemies who already have evidence of some injury with intraventricular hemorrhage? So there's an ongoing trial in Europe where they're taking preemies with IVH and treating them with 5 doses of EPO. I know Dr. Robinson at Hopkins is also planning a trial of combining EPO with melatonin to see if it can help in babies who have had intraventricular hemorrhage. We have been talking a lot about HIE, but really I've been focusing on moderate to severe HIE. There are a lot of babies that are also born with a milder degree of HIE, and we don't know much about how to help them improve their outcomes. And so darbepoetin is a long-acting form of EPO and is also being studied as a neuroprotective agent, both for mild HIE and for neonatal arterial stroke. So this is when a stroke is when there is a clot in the brain. It actually causes a focal area of injury as opposed to a global injury like you see in HIE. And Dr. DeBeese is, and her group is studying darbepoetin for that. Okay, so before I end, I wanted to talk a little bit about other cooling plus agents that are being studied. So we focused on erythropoietin because it's gone the most, it's come along the furthest in terms of studying. There's several phase 3 trials ongoing. There are several other agents that are in phase 2 trials. I've mentioned melatonin, allopurinol, mag sulfate. There's also a very long list of promising agents that are in preclinical animal studies, including mesenchymal stem cells, azithromycin, etc. One way to keep track of all the agents that are coming down the pipeline and being studied is to think about their mechanism of action. And so, for instance, there are agents being studied that are anti-excitotoxic, so it reduces excitotoxic injury. There are agents such as melatonin that are antioxidants. There are anti-inflammatory agents like azithromycin. And then there are agents that have multiple mechanisms. We've talked about hypothermia, we've talked about erythropoietin. Melatonin I've added to this list because it's both an antioxidant and has anti-inflammatory properties. And stem cells. So I know there's a lot of excitement around stem cells, and I wanted to just devote a little time at the end of the talk to this. So when we talk about treating newborn brain injury, we're talking primarily about using mesenchymal stem cells. These are stem cells that can be harvested from the baby's own cord blood, or they can be harvested from donor cord samples. And it's exciting to think about what these cells could do. They certainly, we know, can differentiate into a variety of brain cell types, neurons, astrocytes, oligodendrocytes. But they also have multiple other properties. They reduce apoptosis. They can also improve angiogenesis. They are anti-inflammatory. They produce trophic factors that are also thought to help improve cell survival after injury. Because of what we know about all these potentially neuroprotective properties, there are now some early clinical trials here in the U.S. The first would be Mike Cotton and Joanne Kurtzberg at Duke. They have an ongoing study where they're taking donor cord-derived MSCs, and they're treating babies with HIE who are being cooled, hypothermia here. And they first treated 3 babies with 1 infusion of stem cells at under 48 hours, and then they're now on to babies getting both an early dose and another infusion at 2 months, which I think is really interesting to be addressing acute and this later chronic repair time period. There's also a study at New York Medical Center where they're infusing autologous cord blood from the baby's own cord blood on days 0, 3, and 7, and placental-derived stem cells. So I think thinking about this is really exciting, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. I do want to, though, remind us that it's still very early in our understanding of how to use stem cells for newborn brain injury. So here you see this stands for human umbilical cord blood cells, and this mesenchymal stem cells can differentiate into all different types of brain cells. But there's so much we don't know. We really don't know how many of these cells should be given. You know, should it be a single or multiple administrations? How should the cells be given? There are a variety of options, and where makes a difference. When should the cells be transplanted? Which patients would benefit? And really importantly, we actually don't understand well how they work. There's a lot of different potential mechanisms. So it's still quite early. I will stop there. I think the main take-home messages from my talk are first that HIE is an important cause of newborn brain injury and long-term impairments in term infants. Therapeutic hypothermia, we know, reduces the risk of CP and other neurodevelopmental impairments after HIE. There are now many potential neuroprotective agents that are being studied. So erythropoietin we talked about, stem cells, very early stages, and there's just a long list of additional agents. It's an exciting time in this field. I did want to acknowledge the importance of parents and parent-led organizations for raising awareness and support for HIE research, such as the Hope for HIE Foundation. I also wanted to acknowledge the really great work that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing. They're supporting an active pipeline of testing a number of the neuroprotective therapies that I've mentioned in animal models, and understandably, they're focusing on agents that are inexpensive and feasible for use in low and middle income countries. So for instance, repurposing things like azithromycin and melatonin. And they are supporting studies on how to prevent HIE in the first place. And an example of that is a study that I'm doing with Dr. Kearney at McGill University, where we're looking at using machine learning methods to better identify during labor and delivery which babies are really at risk. So with that, I'd like to thank this amazing group of neonatologists, child neurologists, developmental pediatricians, researchers. They're just the most dedicated people I know. And you probably recognize, many of you, some of the people in this picture. I would like to thank the funders of my research, and I will thank all of you for participating and listening today to my talk, especially those of you in the East Coast. I know it's getting pretty late over there. So thank you very much.
So I'm going to start right with the questions and get things started. So the first question is, some researchers are looking at brain-derived neurotrophic factor for reducing excitotoxic death of motor neurons in ALS and also in brain degenerative conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Is there a role for neurotrophic factors in infants at risk with CP?
There certainly is, and I think there's a large body of evidence to support that. Like I mentioned, there's just a large list of potential therapies, and people have been trying to prioritize how to pick and choose what to study first. And The processes that I've seen, BDNF and other growth factors have not been really high on the list of priority. And I think maybe it's just a matter of the amount of available evidence compared to some of the other agents that are being studied, and what kind of animal models and how many models have been used. But clearly, one of the exciting things about stem cells, like I mentioned, is that it does increase the production of BDNF and other growth factors, and in fact, EPO does as well. So it's a good question.
Okay, so this question sort of has two parts, and I'm going to try and put the two parts together. Paul Gross would like to know, can you say a little bit about understanding etiology? Oops, hold on, sorry. Can you say a little bit about the difference in the injury mechanism for prematurity and HIE, and whether, if any of the hypotheses for the peanut study, he sort of wanted to know whether or not, did we learn anything from the negative result of the peanut study that tells you about the potential outcomes for your HEAL study?
Oh, always good questions from you, Paul. Thank you. I think of preterm brain injury as being very different from HIE in term infants. I think the mechanism is different. I think the brain is different. As I mentioned with peanut, it was all preterm infants. And so, there's so many things that can then happen during their course in the nursery, and many of them do great and don't have any injury. So I think it was harder to see an effect, whereas in term infants of HIE, like in our study, they are all born with a particular clinical picture of moderate to severe encephalopathy, and they have really low cord gases. They need to be resuscitated. So something acute happened, and we also know then that we're giving EPO like within 24 hours or 48 hours of whatever happened. So it's a little bit more of a homogeneous condition, but not 100% homogeneous. We all know that too. So we shall see. We're hopeful that the negative result at peanut doesn't mean that HEAL will also be completely negative. It's possible HEAL will show a benefit, but not be clinically, or not be statistically significant, and maybe some of the other trials around the world can be kind of put together the way the cooling trials, when they were all put together, really showed an effect. So fingers crossed.
Okay, I know that there are a lot more questions, and I have to apologize for cutting you off. I think your email is in the registration, so that if people have a specific question, maybe they can reach out to you directly. We want to thank you for your talk and the interesting topic, and being part of our meeting virtually. We're really sorry you weren't there in person, so that people could meet you in the halls and ask some more questions. Okay, so we are getting ready for the poster call. We want to thank all of our presenters for tonight. We've had a very interesting evening of talks. And now what I want you to do is grab your glass of wine or your beverage of choice and go and join the annual meeting event site. So you need to go back to the annual meeting event site and get into your poster crawl with the past presidents. And we are excited to having their expertise as they lead you through the presentations with the presenters. So the presenters will do a quick talk, and then you'll be able to ask questions. So join them, grab your beverage, relax, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Oh, the poster crawl is starting at 7:45 tonight, 7:45 Central Time. So in about 15, 20 minutes, okay? Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you again tomorrow.